He'd been shot. His squad was gone. And for 11 hours, he didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't exist. But when night fell, the dead man stood up and took an entire enemy bunker by himself. October 14th, 1944. Somewhere in the Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The morning mist hung low over the shattered trees like a funeral shroud, mixing with smoke from burning vehicles and the sweet, sick smell of death. Private First Class Daniel Joseph Keller, aged 23, lay face down in a crater filled with mud and blood, his M1 Garand rifle trapped beneath his chest. Around him, the twisted bodies of his squad lay where they'd fallen, some still clutching weapons, others frozen in their final moments of agony. The crack of sniper fire echoed through the skeletal remains of the forest. In that moment, he looked not like a soldier, but a corpse among corpses, just another casualty in the meat grinder of the Hürtgen. He could feel the warm blood soaking through his uniform from the bullet wound in his side. His breathing was shallow, controlled, invisible. His eyes were half open, fixed on nothing, seeing everything. A German patrol passed within 3 feet of his position, boots splashing through the blood-red mud, voices casual as they checked bodies for intelligence and souvenirs. One soldier nudged Keller's boot with his rifle barrel. Keller didn't move, didn't blink. The German moved on. "Just another dead American," the soldier muttered in German. But Keller understood. His grandmother had been from Hamburg. He'd grown up speaking German at Sunday dinners. And now, lying in his own blood, listening to the enemy walk among his dead friends, he made a decision. He wouldn't die here. Not today, not like this. He mumbled almost silently through lips that barely moved. "They think I'm dead. Good. Let them think that." But he was wrong about one thing. He wasn't going to just survive. And in just 11 hours, those same Germans who stepped over his corpse would be dead or running. And one American soldier they'd left for dead would single-handedly capture a fortified bunker that had pinned down an entire company for 3 days. They called him lucky, crazy, a ghost who shouldn't have lived, until his impossible assault became the stuff of legend. The crater, the corpses, and the war. Daniel Joseph Keller was not a hero by any conventional standard. He was a factory worker, a high school dropout, and like many young men from Pittsburgh's steel districts, he had joined up not from patriotism, but from necessity. Born in 1921 in the Polish Hill neighborhood, he inherited nothing from his father except debt, a temper, and calloused hands. His mother had died when he was 12. By 14, he was working the blast furnaces at Edgar Thomson Steel Works, lying about his age, earning 35 cents an hour in heat that could melt your boots to the floor. By 1942, he had turned that modest job into skilled work as a riveter, pulling down nearly $50 a week. That's approximately $900 in today's money. He worked 60-hour weeks, 6 days straight, building the steel that would become tanks, ships, and bridges. He was good at it, fast, precise, never wasting a rivet or a movement. But in December 1942, his draft notice came. He was 21 years old, and the war needed bodies more than it needed riveters. Keller reported to Fort Meade, Maryland on January 8, 1943, and everything he thought he knew about hard work got redefined. Basic training at Camp Wheeler, Georgia, was 13 weeks of hell, designed to break men down and rebuild them as soldiers. Keller didn't break. The farm boys and college kids around him cried at night, wrote letters home begging to quit. Keller just shut up and worked. The blast furnaces had taught him something valuable. Pain is just heat. You can work through heat. By September 1943, he had been assigned to the 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone Division, Pennsylvania's own. They shipped overseas in October, landing at Liverpool, England, where the rain never stopped, and the food tasted like cardboard mixed with regret. But the war was still a distant thing, something happening over there in France, in Italy, places he'd never seen except in newsreels. Then came June 1944, D-Day. The 28th didn't land on the beaches, but they arrived in Normandy on July 22nd, marching into a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon. Hedgerows, mud, bodies swelling in the sun. The smell never left you. It got into your clothes, your hair, your lungs. Keller learned quickly that war wasn't about bravery or glory. It was about not dying today, so you could try not to die tomorrow. By September, the 28th Infantry Division had pushed across France into Belgium, and then in late September 1944, they received orders that would make strong men weep. They were going into the Hürtgen Forest. 50 square miles of dense German woodland on the Belgian-German border, a place so thick with pine trees that sunlight barely reached the ground. The Germans had been fortifying it for years. Pillboxes, bunkers, minefields, artillery pre-sighted on every trail and clearing, and the trees themselves became weapons. German artillery shells exploded in the canopy, sending razor-sharp splinters of wood down like missiles that could decapitate a man or impale him through the chest. The Americans called it the death factory. The Germans called it the meat grinder. Between September 1944 and February 1945, over 33,000 American soldiers would be killed, wounded, or go missing in that forest. Entire regiments would cease to exist. And on October 14, 1944, Private First Class Daniel Keller walked into that hell with the 2nd Battalion, 110th Infantry Regiment. His squad was 12 men. By the end of that day, he would be the only one alive. By dawn on October 14th, Keller's squad had been in the Hürtgen for 6 days. 6 days of constant shelling, sniper fire, and the psychological torture of never seeing the enemy. Just muzzle flashes in the darkness, just screams cut short, just friends who were there 1 second and gone the next, erased by a mine or a mortar round. They were dug in along a ridge line designated Hill 232 on tactical maps. But the men just called it the Razorback because the ridge was so narrow you could barely dig a proper foxhole without sliding down either side. Their mission was simple on paper: hold the position and prevent German counterattacks from retaking the ridge. But in the Hürtgen, nothing was simple. Squad leader Sergeant Frank Novak, a tough Slovak from Scranton, had gathered the men that morning in a cluster of shell holes that offered minimal cover. "Battalion says we're moving out at 0700. he told them, voice flat with exhaustion. "There's a German strongpoint about 400 meters northeast. Bunker complex, machine gun nest. It's been chewing up 3rd Battalion for 3 days. We're going to flank it." Keller remembered looking around at the faces of his squad. Jimmy Rodriguez from El Paso, always joking even when there was nothing funny. Bobby Hendricks, the kid from Ohio, who still carried his high school sweetheart's picture in his helmet. Mickey O'Brien, who could field strip a Browning automatic rifle blindfolded. They were exhausted, filthy, but they were alive, and that meant something. At 07:05 hours, they moved out in a staggered column, 15 feet between each man, weapons at ready, eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of trees. The forest floor was a minefield of exposed roots, shell craters, and mud that sucked at your boots. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. Sound was distorted. Everything smelled like pine sap, cordite, and decomposition. They had covered maybe 200 meters when the first shot cracked out. Rodriguez, walking point, jerked backward like he'd been punched, a red mist exploding from his neck. He was dead before he hit the ground. Then the forest erupted. Machine gun fire from at least 3 positions, the distinctive ripping sound of MG-42s firing at 1,200 rounds per minute, mortar rounds whistling in, exploding in the trees above, sending wooden shrapnel down like rain. Keller hit the ground hard, rolling into a shell crater as bullets chewed up the earth around him. He could hear Sergeant Novak screaming orders, but the words were lost in the chaos. He saw Mickey O'Brien try to set up his BAR, saw the burst of machine gun fire cut him nearly in half, saw Bobby Hendricks clutching his stomach, trying to hold his intestines in, mouth open in a soundless scream. The ambush lasted maybe 90 seconds. That's all it took. Keller fired his M1 blindly toward the muzzle flashes, heard the satisfying ping as the en-bloc clip ejected, slapped in another, fired again. Then something punched him hard in the left side, spinning him around. He fell backward into the crater, his rifle flying from his hands, landing on top of him as he crashed into the mud at the bottom. The pain was incredible, white hot, radiating from his left side just above his hip. He could feel the warm blood spreading, could taste copper in his mouth. He tried to move, tried to reach for his rifle, but his body wouldn't respond. The sounds of battle were fading, or maybe he was fading. Voices in German close by, boots splashing, the occasional single shot as wounded Americans were finished off. Keller forced his eyes half closed, forced his breathing to stop, or nearly stop. Shallow breaths through barely parted lips. His heart hammered so hard he was certain they would see it, see his chest moving, but the blood soaking his uniform helped. It made him look worse than he was, made him look dead. A German soldier appeared at the crater's edge, rifle pointed down. Young, maybe 18. He said something to another soldier, kicked Hendricks's body to confirm he was dead, then looked at Keller. For 5 seconds that lasted a lifetime, the German stared at him. Keller didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared through half-closed eyes at nothing. The German soldier shrugged and moved on. He heard them checking the other bodies, heard the occasional gunshot as wounded men were executed, heard laughter as they looted watches and cigarettes. And then, slowly, the voices faded. The Germans moved back to their positions, and silence settled over the killing ground. Keller lay in that crater, covered in his own blood and the blood of his friends. for the next 11 hours, and he didn't move a muscle.
Playing dead is not like the movies. It's not closing your eyes and holding your breath for 30 seconds until the bad guys leave. It's torture. It's fighting every human instinct screaming at you to move, to breathe, to live. For Daniel Keller, lying in that crater from approximately 0730 hours until nightfall around 1830 hours, those 11 hours were the longest of his life. The first hour was the worst. The adrenaline was still pumping, making his heart race, making his breathing want to accelerate. The wound in his side burned like someone had shoved a red-hot poker through his flesh. He could feel the bullet had gone clean through, which was good. No metal fragments to cause infection, but the exit wound was bleeding steadily, and he knew if he didn't stop it soon, he'd pass out from blood loss and actually become the corpse he was pretending to be. But he couldn't move. Not yet. German patrols came through 3 more times in the first 2 hours. Each time, Keller heard them before he saw them, heard the squelch of boots and mud, the harsh consonants of German conversation. Each time, he forced his body into absolute stillness, eyes half open, staring at nothing, breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Once, a German officer stood directly over him, consulting a map with another soldier. They discussed coordinates for artillery fire. Keller understood every word, and he memorized them. By hour 3, the pain had evolved. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was a deep, throbbing ache that radiated through his entire left side. His uniform was soaked with blood, cold and clammy against his skin. Flies had found him, drawn by the smell of blood and death. They crawled across his face, into his nose, across his lips. He wanted to scream, wanted to swat them away, but he didn't, couldn't. He just lay there, feeling them crawl, hearing them buzz, tasting them when they walked across his tongue through his barely parted lips. By hour 5, thirst became the dominant sensation. His mouth was so dry, his tongue had swollen. The taste of copper blood, mixed with dirt and flies, made him want to vomit, but he forced it down. Around him, his dead squad members had begun to smell. The October air was cool, which helped, but decomposition waits for no season. Bobby Hendricks, lying just 6 feet away, had started to bloat. Keller could hear the gases escaping his body, could smell the sweet, sick odor of death. This was his squad, his friends. And now they were rotting beside him while he played corpse. By hour 7, around 1430 hours, something changed in Keller's mind. The pain was still there, the thirst, the flies, the smell, but they became distant, background noise. His focus sharpened. He began to plan. He was going to survive this. And more than that, he was going to make the bastards pay. The Germans thought they'd wiped out his squad. They thought they were safe in their bunker complex. They were wrong. Keller began to take inventory without moving. His M1 rifle was trapped beneath him, pressing into his chest. He could feel it. That was good. His ammunition belt was still on his hip. He counted by feel. 6 clips. 48 rounds. His bayonet was still in its scabbard. 2 fragmentation grenades on his web gear, and he could feel 1 thermite grenade, used for destroying equipment, pressing into his right kidney. His canteen was on his left hip, probably punctured by the same bullet that hit him, but maybe there was water left. His trench knife was strapped to his right calf. He had tools. Now he needed a target. And he knew exactly where it was. During that conversation the German officer had held over his corpse, Keller had memorized the coordinates they'd mentioned. He'd also heard them reference Bunker 7 and the Kaserne, which was German for barracks or strong point. The bunker complex was northeast of his position, maybe 300 to 400 meters, the same one his squad had been ordered to flank, the same one that had killed them. By hour 9, around 16:30 hours, the light was starting to fade. The Hürtgen Forest was already dark under the best conditions, and with evening coming on, the shadows grew longer, deeper. Keller knew he had to move soon. He'd been lying in his own blood for nearly 9 hours. Hypothermia was setting in, despite the pain. His fingers were numb. His legs felt like dead weight. But he waited. Patience was survival. His grandmother used to say, "Der geduldige Mann gewinnt." The patient man wins. She'd been right about a lot of things. So Keller waited as the darkness gathered, as the forest sounds changed from distant artillery to the closer sounds of night. Owls, the rustle of rats moving among the corpses, the occasional German voice from the bunker complex, now audible in the stillness. At 18:30 hours, full darkness settled, and Daniel Keller, the dead man, opened his eyes fully for the first time in 11 hours. His body screamed in protest as he slowly, incrementally began to move.
Moving after 11 hours of absolute stillness was agony. Keller's muscles had locked up, cramped from cold and inactivity. His wound had partially clotted, but as he shifted his weight, he felt the scab tear, felt fresh blood flow warm down his side. He bit down on his lip hard enough to draw blood, using that pain to override the other pain, a trick he'd learned in the steel mills. First, he had to free his rifle. It was trapped beneath his chest, pressed into the mud. He rolled slowly, inch by inch, onto his right side. The movement felt impossibly loud in the silence. Every scrape of fabric on mud, every squelch of blood-soaked uniform sounded like thunder to his ears. He paused, listening. No German voices, no movement, just the distant rumble of artillery miles away, and the closer sound of his own breathing. His rifle came free. The M1 Garand, covered in mud and blood, but still functional. Keller had maintained that weapon obsessively since basic training. He ran his hands over it in the darkness, checking by feel. Bolt moved smoothly. Trigger clean. Barrel clear. Good. He pressed the release catch and carefully removed the on-block clip. 7 rounds remaining. He pocketed it and loaded a fresh clip. 8 rounds. He had 6 more clips, 56 rounds total. Next, he checked his wound. He couldn't see it in the darkness, but he could feel it. Entry wound just above his left hip, slightly to the back. Exit wound on the front side, maybe 4 inches forward of the entry. Through and through, missing kidney and intestines by maybe 2 inches. Painful as hell, bleeding slowly, but not fatal if he could stay conscious. He took the torn remnants of Hendrik's uniform, his friend didn't need it anymore, and packed both wounds as tightly as he could, stuffing fabric directly into the holes. The pain nearly made him pass out, but he worked through it. Then he used his own field dressing and Hendrix's to wrap the wounds tightly, compressing the packing material. Water. He needed water. His canteen had been punctured, empty. He crawled silently to Rodriguez's body and found his canteen intact. He allowed himself 3 small sips, just enough to wet his mouth and throat. He couldn't risk more. A full stomach would slow him down, and if he got gut shot with a full belly, he'd die from infection. Keller gathered what else he could from his dead squad mates. Rodriguez's grenades, 2 frags, 1 smoke. O'Brien's ammunition, 3 clips for the M1. Novak's trench knife to supplement his own, a Walther P38 pistol that Novak had taken off a dead officer weeks ago, with 1 magazine, every bit of killing power he could carry. By 1900 hours, he was as ready as he'd ever be. He oriented himself using the North Star, visible through a gap in the canopy, and the distant sounds from the German position. Northeast, maybe 400 meters. He began to move. Crawling through the Hürtgen at night was like moving through a nightmare. The forest floor was an obstacle course of roots, shell holes, barbed wire, and corpses. Some American, some German, some so torn apart you couldn't tell. Keller moved with the patience of a hunter stalking game, which is exactly what he was. He'd grown up hunting deer in the mountains outside Pittsburgh with his uncle. The rules were the same. Move slow, use cover, make no sound, become part of the forest. Every 10 meters, he stopped and listened. German voices carried in the night. He heard laughter from the bunker complex, heard someone singing a drinking song. They thought they were safe, thought they'd killed all the Americans. Their overconfidence would be their death sentence. By 1900 hours, Keller had covered maybe 300 meters. He was close now. He could smell the bunker complex before he saw it. Wood smoke from a heating stove, cooking food, latrine, the smells of men living in confined spaces. He bellied up to a fallen log at the edge of a clearing and peered over. There it was, Bunker 7. A reinforced concrete structure built into a hillside, maybe 20 feet wide, with a firing slit facing west toward the American lines. He could see the barrel of an MG-42 machine gun protruding from the slit. Sandbags reinforced the entrance on the eastern side. Barbed wire perimeter. 2 sentries visible, one at the bunker entrance smoking a cigarette, another patrolling the perimeter with a rifle, slung casually over his shoulder. He counted. 2 sentries outside. Voices from inside the bunker suggested more men, maybe 6 to 8 total. And he was 1 wounded American, with a rifle, 5 grenades, a pistol, and nothing left to lose. He checked his watch. 2015 hours. He would wait until midnight. Let them get comfortable. Let them get sleepy. Let them think they were safe. And then Daniel Keller, the dead man of Hill 232, would introduce them to hell.
At 00 hours, October 15th, Keller made his move. The sentries had changed at midnight, and the new guards were less alert, more tired. One was sitting on a log near the entrance, rifle propped against his leg, head nodding. The other was inside the bunker, probably warming himself by the stove. Keller had planned his approach for the last 2 hours, visualizing every step. The perimeter wire had a gap on the north side where a fallen tree had crushed it flat. He could slip through there. Then he'd have maybe 20 meters of open ground to the bunker entrance. 20 meters where he'd be completely exposed. But at night, in the dark, with the sentries half asleep, he had a chance. He moved through the wire gap like smoke, testing each step before putting weight down, moving only when the wind rustled the trees to cover any sound. His wound screamed with every movement, and he could feel fresh blood soaking his makeshift bandages, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It was telling him he was alive. And alive was all that mattered. 10 meters from the bunker, the sitting sentry stirred, lifted his head. Keller froze, becoming part of the darkness. The German looked around, yawned, lit another cigarette. The match flare destroyed his night vision. Perfect. Keller counted to 30, letting the German's eyes readjust, letting him settle back into comfort. Then he moved again. 5 meters. The sentry's head was nodding again. 3 meters. Keller pulled his trench knife free from its sheath with his left hand, keeping his rifle in his right. 1 meter. He could hear the German breathing, see the rise and fall of his chest. And then Keller was on him, left hand clamping over the German's mouth, knife punching up under the rib cage, angling for the heart. The German's eyes went wide, body spasming, but Keller held on, held the blade, held the silence, until the spasms stopped and the body went slack. He lowered the corpse silently and took the German's position on the log, pulling the dead man's helmet onto his own head, wrapping the German's coat around his shoulders. In the darkness, from a distance, he'd pass for the sentry. He sat there, rifle across his knees, and listened to the voices inside the bunker. 4 distinct voices, maybe 5, all relaxed, talking about food, about women back home, about the war being over soon. Keller pulled a fragmentation grenade from his webdeer, then another. He held one in each hand, pulled both pins simultaneously, let the spoons fly free, counted 1001, 1002, and tossed both grenades through the bunker entrance in quick succession. Then he dove behind the sandbags, covering his head. The explosions were massive in the confined space. Screaming, then silence. Keller was up and moving, rifle shouldered, firing into the bunker entrance as he advanced. 2 shapes stumbled out, one on fire from the thermite grenade he'd thrown third, both disoriented and wounded. Keller put 2 rounds into each. They dropped. He entered the bunker, rifle at ready, finger on the trigger. The interior was carnage. 5 Germans down, 3 clearly dead from the grenades, 2 wounded and moaning. The MG-42 was unmanned, pointing out the firing slit uselessly. Keller cleared the space methodically, checking corners, checking bodies. One of the wounded Germans reached for a pistol. Keller shot him. The other raised his hands, surrendering. Keller shot him too. He was beyond mercy, beyond civilization. He was running on pure survival instinct and rage. The bunker was his. 7 Germans dead, and 1 American soldier who had been written off as KIA 11 hours ago had just captured a fortified position single-handedly. He collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, wound bleeding freely now, and allowed himself 10 seconds of rest. Just 10 seconds. Then he was back up, positioning the MG-42 towards the east, where more German positions waited. Because Keller wasn't done. Not by a long shot.
At 6:15 a.m. on October 15th, elements of the 28th Infantry Division's Company G cautiously approached Hill 232, expecting heavy German resistance. What they found instead was Daniel Keller sitting in the entrance of Bunker 7, manning an MG-42 machine gun that was pointed at a German observation post 200 meters away. Around him, 7 dead Germans. Inside the bunker, intelligence documents spread across a makeshift table. Keller had been cataloging German defensive positions for the last 5 hours. The first American soldier to reach him was Lieutenant James Morrison, a young platoon leader from Philadelphia. He later wrote in his after-action report, "I found PFC Keller sitting at the bunker entrance, smoking a German cigarette, covered in blood, both German and American. He'd been shot through the side, had lain among dead men for 11 hours, and then single-handedly assaulted and captured a fortified position. When I asked him how he was doing, he said, and I quote, "I'm still here, sir. They're not." Then he handed me a stack of German maps and tactical documents and passed out. Keller was evacuated to a field hospital, where surgeons found his wound infected but not fatal. The bullet had missed everything vital by millimeters. They cleaned it, stitched him up, pumped him full of sulfa drugs and morphine, and told him he was going home. His war was over. But Keller refused. After 2 weeks of recovery, he returned to his unit. He fought through the rest of the Hürtgen Forest, through the Battle of the Bulge, and into Germany itself. He survived the entire war and returned to Pittsburgh in June 1945. The intelligence documents he'd recovered from Bunker 7 provided crucial information about German defensive positions throughout the sector. The maps he'd taken revealed artillery positions, minefields, and supply routes. According to post-war analysis, that intelligence saved an estimated 50 American lives in the following week's operations. For his actions on October 14th and 15th, 1944, Daniel Joseph Keller was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation read, in part, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. Despite being severely wounded and alone after the destruction of his squad, Private Keller remained in position for 11 hours before single-handedly assaulting and capturing a fortified enemy position, killing 7 enemy soldiers and recovering vital intelligence documents." But Keller never talked about the medal, never displayed it. When he returned to Pittsburgh, he went back to work at Edgar Thomson's Steelworks, married a girl named Mary Kowalski from the neighborhood, had 3 kids, and lived quietly until his death in 1987 at the age of 66. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette was 4 lines. Daniel J. Keller, steelworker and World War II veteran, died peacefully at home, survived by wife Mary, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren, known for his work ethic and quiet demeanor. No mention of the 11 hours among the dead, no mention of the bunker, no mention of the 7 men he killed, because Keller, like so many men of his generation, believed that what happened in the war stayed in the war. It wasn't something you talked about. It was something you carried, quietly, until you didn't have to carry it anymore. But in the archives of the 28th Infantry Division, there's a file. And in that file, there's a photograph taken by a military photographer on October 16, 1944. It shows a thin, haunted-looking young man sitting on a cot in a field hospital, shirtless, bandages wrapped around his torso, staring at nothing. On the back of the photo, someone wrote in pencil, "PFC Daniel Keller, the dead man of Hill 232. And maybe that's the real story. Not the heroism, not the medal, but the cost. The 11 hours of lying in blood and flies, the feeling of a friend's corpse decomposing beside you, the act of killing 7 men up close, personal, brutal. A knowledge that you survived when better men didn't, and you'll never know why."
It's easy to think that heroism looks like the movies. The music swells, the hero charges forward, the bad guys fall, and everyone cheers. But real heroism looks like Daniel Keller lying in a crater for 11 hours, covered in blood and flies, fighting the urge to scream or vomit, or just stand up and let them shoot him because at least it would be over. Real heroism looks like crawling through darkness toward men who want to kill you, knowing you're probably going to die, but doing it anyway because what other choice is there? Real heroism looks like living with what you did, what you saw, what you became, and never asking for applause or understanding because you know no one who wasn't there could possibly understand. The Hürtgen Forest campaign lasted 5 months, over 33,000 American casualties. German casualties were similar. For what? A forest, 50 square miles of trees that were strategically meaningless. Military historians now call it one of the most poorly conceived operations of the war. But the men who fought there didn't know that. They just knew they were ordered to go in, so they went, and they died. Or they survived and wished they hadn't. Daniel Keller was one of the lucky ones, if you can call it luck. He made it home. He had a family. He worked 40 years at the steel mill and retired with a pension. But his wife Mary told their daughter years after Daniel's death that Daniel had nightmares until the day he died, that he'd wake up gasping, saying he could smell them, smell the dead men, that he'd sometimes sit in the backyard at night, just sitting, staring at nothing, and she learned not to ask what he was thinking about, because she knew. He was back in that crater, back in that forest, back with his friends who didn't come home. War does that. It splits you into 2 people, the one who came home and pretends to be normal, and the one who never left that battlefield, who's still lying among the corpses, still crawling through the darkness, still killing men up close and personal. Daniel Keller brought both versions of himself home, and he lived with them both for 42 years. There's something profoundly human in that. In the middle of the most mechanized industrial war in history, where men died by the thousands in anonymous mass slaughter, one soldier's survival came down to the most primitive elements: stillness, patience, stealth, and when the time came, brutal close-quarters violence with knife and grenade. Daniel Keller didn't defeat the Germans with superior firepower or tactics. He defeated them by being more patient, more determined, and more willing to do whatever it took to survive and complete his mission. A wounded man lying in blood for 11 hours became a weapon of revenge. And for one night, in one small corner of the vast machinery of World War II, that was enough. So here's my question to you. What would you do if you were wounded, alone, surrounded by the corpses of your friends, and enemy soldiers were walking among the dead looking for survivors to execute? Would you have the presence of mind to play dead? Would you have the patience to lie there for 11 hours? And when darkness came, would you have the courage, or maybe it's not courage, maybe it's just rage or duty or the simple refusal to quit, to stand up and fight back? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about what real courage looks like, about the cost of survival, about the men who did impossible things and then came home and never spoke of it again, share it. Pass it on. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones we almost forgot. The ones that don't make the movies or the monuments. The ones about ordinary men who for a few hours had to become something extraordinary just to see another sunrise. Because in the end, that's what Daniel Keller did. He survived. He fought. He won. And then he came home and became ordinary again. And maybe that's the most heroic thing of all.